Good morning, everyone. My name is Justin Hodgson, and this is like take 11, just so you know. Every time I record this, I keep messing something up. So I want to first off say thank you for taking the time to look at my work and to question it and to challenge it and to struggle with it in various ways. I had hoped to be able to Skype in or Zoom into your class to have this conversation in person, but I'm in transit the next couple of weeks. I'm giving a talk today at Clemson. I'm out in LA for 4 days for an event out there giving talks. And so it's unfortunately the timing didn't work. So I wanted to take a moment to talk with you all, or at least maybe talk at you because it's a video recording, right? And sort of address some of the questions. I really appreciate the questions you've asked. I think you've asked some really brilliant things. But I want to preface some of this a little bit by saying it's important to recognize that your confusion and or struggles should not have been only because there's lots of layers and things going on, right? But rather that this piece was initially created for the Computers and Writing Conference before it was remade a little bit to be published in Tech Shop Experiments. And so initially it was targeted for graduate students and faculty members who teach writing studies in and around technology, so computational writing practices. So there's a lot of field knowledge and a lot of gestures in it that if you're not a member of that academic community, they may not make sense to you. And so while I understand that there's a lot of media that's confusing and that's intentional, it's definitely understandable in many cases that some of the things would be just a little bit off because again, it's like undergraduates really weren't the initial audience for this. Now that I think about it, perhaps they should be, right? Or maybe I should remake it so that it makes more sense now. But it's it's for these folks who understand things like there's one point in the video, there's a picture of John Cage doing his little silent thing, and then the turning video of Marshall McLuhan. And if you know who Marshall McLuhan is and you know who John Cage is, then their presence on the screen offers a kind of visual resonance with the things that I'm trying to do. And so, that's some of that's like field-based knowledge or studies-based approaches. And so it's those kinds of things, or knowing terms like electricity, that stuff that maybe make more sense and be less confusing than it is. Now, to be fair, you are absolutely right. There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of layers, a lot of complexities, and it's intentional and it's confusing, and it's meant to sort of complement or work counter to the sort of relatively flat tone of my voice. That's an intentional practice. I think somebody asked about that at one point or commented in their blog about, the monotone quality of the voice. First off, that's just part of it's my natural talking. But typically speaking, as a speaker, I am more animated and a little more energetic just because I talk fast and so the audio tonality and delivery is with intentionality so that it sort of like hides in amongst all the layers, right? So there's that kind of thing to think about. I keep gesturing like this, I feel like I'm throwing things at you. So again, apologize. It's been a long day already, right? And it's only like 11 o'clock here. So let me get to some of your questions and try and respond to them as best I can. Let me see here. I've lost my page now. They will show up there. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of work through some of these things, right? So the first question that was sent to me was, what is your background and what inspired you to create this kind of compilation? So truth be told, my background is in a number of things, but so I had an undergraduate degree in creative writing. So I did a lot of creative nonfiction work, but I got into rhetoric studies as an undergraduate my senior year because I got into taking some independent courses with a faculty member who was a rhetoric scholar. And I just really liked it. I liked rhetoric. I like what it is as a field, as a theory, as a thing. Then I went to get my master's degree in the teaching of writing so that I could teach college level writing classes. And while I was there, I got hooked up with visual studies scholar, visual rhetoric scholars, Carolyn Honda, and loved that. And I thought, oh my goodness, the way the visual works is really profound. And from that, I went to Clemson University, which is where I'm at today, giving the alumni talk. And while I was here at Clemson, I got to study things like information technologies, different media production skills. And so, while I took courses that introduced me to some concepts, I had no real training in audio production, media production, things of that nature. Or in this case, in this video, using green screens and editing techniques and post-production manipulation practices. I wasn't really formally trained. I learned a lot of that on my own. I started, just making small videos at home and messing with media. And my son was born in 2008. And so I started making little videos of him as a way of learning some of the basic video production techniques as well as video editing techniques. And then after I finished my time here at Clemson, I went to taught at the University of Texas at Austin, where I taught classes in digital media writing, and something about being able to and being forced to teach somebody how to use technologies to do things really changes the landscape. So in terms of my media skills and media background, it's not like I graduated with a film degree or went to a media school by any means. I had one class at Clemson that was an introduction to media technologies, but otherwise, I was just more happenstance. But what I did have, and I think this is perhaps something that cannot be overlooked in today's culture, is connections with people who do video work. So one of my friends in the program is a former filmmaker. I studied at the European Graduate School for for summer, and met a lot of filmmakers and media production folks over there who do audio and video work. And then, I did a workshop at University of Southern Cal and their School of Cinematic Studies and Media, and and took the time to meet people and learn from them and ask them questions and really develop those skills through that kind of platform. And I think that happens a lot more and more now, where you can go online and Google things like how to use Adobe Rush, how to use Premiere Pro, and then you can ask somebody, and it's more organic. I just did it before the network was really fully available, right, in the way that it is now. So I think in terms of background, those are things that part of where I got to this process. But what really inspired this piece is, you know, um, thinking about at the time, right, we were dealing with this tension that says media and media production cannot work as well as a scholarly practice. And so that's one problem that I didn't like. And another one is that so much of what we do in higher education, particularly in the humanities, specifically as I'm commonly in an English department, is we interpret the works of other people and we offer criticism of those works. And for me, that's problematic. I think not only should you be able to create, but by being able to create media, it actually informs the kind of criticism you can offer. So what inspired this particular combination of things was an ongoing conversation amongst me and some colleagues about the tension between creative engagement and critical responsivity, and how I think media operate, in particularly remediation, as a kind of relay. Like when I see really cool things online, I don't want to just critique them. They inspire me to want to make other things. And so that's the framework that sort of operates behind how we got to this. Um, so how's this? Question two is, how is making related to imitation and to our primal drives? I think we are inherently imitative kind of creatures. I mean, even at the very early ages, we're learning language and we're learning behaviors. It's through many times through basic imitation. But what is really fascinating about remix and remediation and the cultural practices of making things, is that we often are able to imitate while being creative. So we are inspired by some of these ideas. We take up with them and we produce in a new direction and we breathe new life into something, right? Or we can borrow a line of text from a song and a beat and an image, and leverage their meaningful significance in the world in new ways. And that to me is, I think, at the core of how a lot of what we do operates. I mean, when we come to language, we discover and we imitate, but we also invent. My youngest, when he was little, he had this word he called lasterday, right? Like LAST, ERDAY, lasterday. And lasterday was a term that, like a pigeon term he come up with, right? That could reference anything from something we did yesterday or last night to something we did last week, right? And so he was learning the concept of time and words like yesterday, and so he just created this thing. And while it seems silly, it's a child, 3-year-old kind of, or 4-year-old kind of thing. It's a functional term. It can work, right? So I think there is a certain drive from us to want to make things. And I think to sort of skip ahead to some of these other questions a little bit, when we work in the digital space, to have a digital existence is predicated on your ability to make something. You have to make contact with a server. You have to produce an identity. You have to have a digital value before you can access things, unless it's a singular digital stream. Now it's a little bit different with TV, but even then, like we're talking about, to have access in many ways is to have produced an digital artifact as a part of that access, or a track or a trace or something like that. So making is at the core, I think, of being in and of digital culture. And so that's sort of part of where this thing operates. I don't know if it's completely primally oriented toward the human condition. I'd like to think it is, but then again, I like to make things. I'm not just a creative person. I like to create things in the world and produce them and see what happens and get people's feedback. And whether it's good or bad, I put something out there and now I know it exists and it operates, and we can then judge how it's received, right? And make it changes from there. Was the video disorienting or distracting as an intentionality, right? And that's a good question. So I think it was less an intent to distract people and more an attempt to saturate them with media, right? I always talk about we live in a hypersaturated media culture. Like right now, I'm on a screen on a computer looking into a camera, talking to myself, which is weird. But I have a phone on, I've got lights on, there's other TVs in the room, there's other computers in the room. I'm getting ping notices. May have a watch on. So these are just basic things. But when we get into digital culture and looking at specifically network culture and looking online, you go to any website or any sort of social media stream, and there are multiple things competing for your attention. And so we live in a hypersaturated media culture. And so while it is distracting in this case, and it's done intentionally to have a lot of streams at once, the goal wasn't necessarily to distract you or disorient you, but rather to sort of replicate or sort of over like hyperize. Is that a word I want? Hyperization? I don't know. There's a term for this, right? The media quality, so that you have to struggle with them a little bit. Now, maybe I went a little overboard, but if nothing else, I almost always go one step too many, right? So I'm like the bad version of Family Guy. If you see this show, like it's only funny if you go a little further, and then it's like, oh, too far. But I always forget, and I always just go too far. So I apologize if it was completely disorienting. But part of that is intentional, right? Absolutely intentional. So in terms of the media saturation, the disorientation is maybe a byproduct. So what gave me the idea to combine so many media? That is, I think at the root of what I do is thinking about how audio, video, text, and voice and communication work across media channels and how they can compete for our attention, but also how they can work complementarily. So there's that is at the core of things that I do. The screencasting was a technique I saw from I don't know if you've seen the film Noah. It's a film shot by college students all on the screen. It has some inappropriate moments. I warn you, but if you get a chance, you might check it out. So some of the techniques were borrowed and inspired by the film Noah. You can just Google it; it'll come up. It's been hugely successful. It's like 10-minute little short or 15-minute short. In terms of like the passages, and things and song choices, the text is sort of poetic, performative at times, and it's also critical and scholarly. And so I was trying to blend genres in terms of what I wanted to say with the textual elements that I speak over the piece. And then I tried to think about, what kind of textual complementary pieces might work as a way of extending the conversation without duplicating the conversation in all times. So that I kind of began with the conceptual operations in both voice and text, which is funny considering how much I typically move towards media, that I go back to text as one of my inventive tools. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just I find it comical as I'm saying it. But the choice of songs was both because this was popular media at the time. I think it was 2014 or 13 when I was making this. I think I initially made this in 2013 for the 2014 Computers and Writing. So you can see there's been a 5 to 6 year period now where we are removed from the media content. And Blurred Lines, of course, wasn't intentional because of what the lyrics do. And many of the songs have resonances at different times for the atmosphere they create, or the message in the titling, or the language of the song. And then the case of the I'm Happy song with Pharrell, it's because that was like one of the most widely remade songs ever. Like people kept remaking videos about the I'm Happy video. So it was a natural link to the kind of commentary I was trying to make, which is, remix culture, remake culture, who's doing it, how are we doing it. And Pharrell's I'm Happy is it's a fantastic piece because of the fact that it acts as a relay. It inspires people to want to make other things. And I think that's really at the core of what digital media does, and does really well in a more immediate, immersive way than perhaps just a good book or a good story does, or good text, which I love. I love, textual practices too. But the digital media and the meme culture and the way we operate in remix culture and remediation, it's just, when you can make something that people also want to try and do or to counter, to me, that's incredibly wonderful, incredibly generative, and reflects the fact that we are part of what we call generative economy, right? So to be online is to generate content, even if it's just, again, a data stream. So, that's sort of where that comes from. They're all intentional. I wasn't so much worried about copyright infringement because of a couple things. One, initially was for a live performance, so one-time performance is protected by fair use in this context because it's educational. And two, I was remixing it and modifying it. And three, initially it was going to be published in an academic journal. There's going to be no profit. So I could legitimately claim fair use because the songs themselves and the pieces themselves are part of the critique and resonate with the critique. Maybe not as overtly as they could, but I think, in a court of law, I could probably make the case. So there's those kinds of things. There could have been other songs I chose, but in the interest of time, these are the ones that I went with because they were, quickly available that I could just pull offline and edit and mix up. So did you purposely intend to use your own modulating voice? Yes. Why did you make this rhetorical choice? So I've made a lot of video products in the field and published them in a variety of journals. And typically speaking, I'm in them. I don't know why. It's just that maybe it's a huge ego. I don't know. But I knew that I wanted to read it in a particular way, and I wanted to sound a particular way. And while there are a couple of people who I could have asked to do the voiceover to help maybe create a different atmosphere, at the time I did this, the initial draft, I was running out of time. It was like, again, like I'm a student like anybody else. So the talk was on like a Thursday, and I was finishing the video on, Tuesday on recording it and rendering it on my way out to, I think we're somewhere in California for the computers writing that year. Maybe Washington, University of Washington, or Washington State. That's where it was. One of those two. Anyways, so it was really a matter of time. I knew what I wanted it to sound like, and I thought I could do it. I could do it. I knew I could do it, and I had considered other people, but just I ran out of time. And so then once I put my own voice over it, it got harder to hear it with somebody else doing it. And so that's sort of how that happened. But again, also I'm typically a component of what I do because I think we write from the self, and we embody ourselves, we embody things in the world, and to ignore my own role in it in my own sort of space, or to abstract myself from that to create a distance of subjectivity, I consider problematic. So that's why, part of that would be the theoretical reason for doing it, but ultimately it came down to just, is last minute decision as I was getting things done. Let's see here. Tension in choosing the words that you did. A lyrical tone, anagrams, and science points. What is there? In short, you seem to be quite textually oriented. Yeah, I think, I began as a creative writer. So I think the power of language is second to very few things. But it doesn't mean it's the only thing. And so, part of the way we communicate to people and engage people meaningfully is through our ability to manipulate language in fun and interesting ways. And so the choice of words was absolutely intentional. There is a kind of lyrical tone at times on purpose, as I mentioned this earlier, trying to blend genres and modes, showing how maybe certain academic kind of practices work versus, non kinds of things. So there's definitely an operative intentionality to that. This question, though, that's asked here, I really like. What is your particular relationship to the digital? That's a fascinating question. And I say that because I teach a class called Introduction to Digital Rhetoric. And the guiding question of my entire course is, what is your relationship to digital technologies, right? And so this is a really, really hard one to unpack. But I think digital technologies at its core are, at this point, a collaborative partner. They're not just an extension of the human body and human thinking, but they have become to inundate and integrate in our lives, in the very fabric of our lives. And so, people see things like, they'll look at like photomosaic paintings. Like there's a painting by Dali called Lincoln and Lithographs. If you could check it and pull it up. And a lot of people, when they look at it, they see pixels. The squares of the photomosaic technique looks like pixels to them. And the fact that they think it's pixels or see pixels there tells me exactly all I need to know about our relationship with technology, right? That the tools and the devices we work with have so inundated and integrated into our lives that we now see digital aesthetics in places that there aren't digital qualities. So photomosaic is an art technique, has nothing to do with pixels, but people see it in a way that they can't not see it there. And there's a bunch of this stuff. I write about it in, I have a book called Post-Digital Rhetoric and the New Aesthetic. And so I cover a lot of these things in that. If you really are looking for a fun thing to do on a Saturday evening, feel free to pick that up. It's actually available for free. You can download it for free. If you Google knowledge base plus post-digital rhetoric, it should take you to the Ohio State University Press site, and you can download the PDF version. I got a grant to make it open to anyone who wants to read it and download it and have it for free. So I'm not encouraging you to do that. It's a long book. It's easier to have a cup of coffee and a conversation. But I think to describe what is my relationship to digital, it takes way more time than I have today. And I would happily revisit this topic later if you want. What made me choose the imagery and from the word choices? So like critic is a leech, 8-bit graphics, so 8-bit spittle. prior to this piece, I had done a digital work on, part of it included talking about frivolity and frivolousness, and how, in the world of Twitter, we tend to celebrate the most frivolous kinds of things. At least we used to. Now it's all politically oriented, but um, and so there is an intentionality with the choice of words, absolutely, in terms of things like, instead of being a critic being a leech, in terms of, sucking the life out of somebody else's work as an act of producing things in the world. The word choice is absolutely intentional, and sometimes intended to spin it. And now we're dealing with 8-bit graphics and pixel aesthetics, and so when you look online, you see these kinds of things everywhere, and it's increasingly more and more frivolous. In fact, now the pixel is in fact an aesthetic choice you can make as a designer rather than a default of the screen. And so these kinds of things are there on purpose. In terms of the visuals, I sometimes choose visuals to align with what I'm saying as a way of illuminating. I sometimes choose visuals that are not exactly what I'm talking about or saying, so that they create like a third space for meaning. In many ways, comics operate this way, or graphic novels, where you have an image of a guy holding a stick, and then the words will say something like, "Look at that cat over there," and then your brain is trying to fit them together, right? How do these things relate? And so a lot of times that's what's going on. I'm showing things that are either analogous, or they're illustrative, or they're extensions of concepts, or they're challenging concepts. So, as we work through visuals and things, that's, sort of how they work. I'm going to move through the questions here real quick. Again, try and keep this a little bit shorter than I can, as short as I can. So how did I choose which words to combine? Some of them are academic terms that have already been combined for me. They're not mine. I didn't invent them, but like the acacritic and play on words and all that stuff. Oh, by the way, the acapella thing, I had just watched Pitch Perfect at the time, so it was definitely part of that game plan. Fascinating film. But this kind of wordplay actually comes out of the work of Gregory Ulmer, and he has concepts like electracy and puncept and all these weird things, where he invents words and neologisms to intentionally create resonances between terms. So a puncept is like a concept, except that it has meaning in multiple registers. And so the terms I was using were designed to try and vibrate in some of the ways that Greg's work does as well. Okay, there we go. Mediation, aspect of life. Am I bricoleur at all times? I don't know if I'm bricoleur at all times, or even in all digital spaces. Sometimes I'm a very templated kind of guy, but I am definitely of the DIY, let's see what we can make with what we have mentality, around the house, around the home, in my own work, in my writing even. Instead of always trying to find the right thing in the world, I can see, well, can I make my way there with what I have? So I think there's a part of that. Also, the bricoleur and the flaneur and the way we talk about these concepts are fundamentals to the kind of research and work that I do. And I've, sort of written about them elsewhere. So yeah, I don't, again, not all the time, but I definitely am, I would say bricoleur oriented, right? As a practitioner in the world. A couple more questions here real quick. What is the effect that digital media has had on the greater socio-political conversation? Right? You referenced the way that memes, right? How does this affect the way that we communicate with each other, and our sensitization or desensitization to national global issues? That's a huge question, right? We could have an entire book on this. In fact, there are books on this. But I think, at the time, the social political conversation, we had opportunities to leverage media to shape and change cultural narratives, or to proffer them. And then ironically, right, within a handful of years, 2016 election, we saw the very power of, media and cultural things to divide and to sow discord, and to create tension among a larger public. This is, sort of what the manipulation of Facebook did. It's not just an echo chamber; it's an opportunity to ignite and incite. And so, on the one hand, there is a direct correlation between, at this point in our culture, the way digital media operates and its social impact on social political conversations. Just the realm by which we engage in cultural identity and ideology cannot be exempt from the digital. And if you don't believe me, just check your Instagram feed, right? How many of you follow sort of key Instagram influencers? And the fact that there's a job now called the Instagram influencer should already attest to this fact, right? This is my dream in life, right? I want to be an Instagram influencer, though I've never been that cool. So I unfortunately will not get there. But I think it's part of the issue, and particularly our current climate, is that we become incredibly oriented to these streams, and now also incredibly distrusting, and sometimes overly trusting. And so, there's a term for this that Greg Ulmer has. It's called compassion fatigue, and it's what happens when we've experienced so many kinds of news stories that we just kind of grow numb to it. So like school shootings are just like ho hum, or like it's unfortunate because it's a horrible tragic event, but we kind of inherently become used to it because our bodies adjust, our human sensoriums adjust, and so it's impossible to now separate what the digital is doing from how humans interact with each other in the world. And so there's absolutely a correlative impact in far more insidious and impactful ways than I had imagined back in 2014 before this. And this was published, what, in 2018? So it just goes to show you sometimes that, this piece sat on the shelf and got reworked a couple times before it fully went into the journal. The transcript that marks a change in human quest for meaning to quest to make, right? So is this a contemporary turn? I don't think it's a contemporary turn. I think that we have always been sort of equally oriented around how do we find meaning and truth in the world, but also how do we make things to communicate meaning and truth to people? And there's an inherent tension that dates back a long, long ways, all the way back to sort of formative days in ancient Greek when alphabetic literacy was really taking hold, with the difference between what we call heuretics, heuretics as an inventive practice and hermeneutics as an interpretive practice. And interpretation and invention has sort of been, jostling back and forth like a chicken and egg thing for a long, long time. And so, I don't think it's necessarily contemporary. I just think what's happened in the last 5 to 10 years, if not 20 years, is a dramatic explosion in who has access to produce and make things and to share their making. Right before the social media and digital networking, every real production value had a gatekeeper somewhere, from books to media to TV. There was somebody controlling what gets on and what gets off. But now distribution networks allow for not only more kinds of making, but more kinds of distribution of that making. And so that's really, I think, where we're at. And then the last one here is, do you feel as though remediation of text is a future of literature? See more media about. I think we already are seeing more media about other pieces of media. I think that you can find many number of examples about this, where you see a video game that becomes a film, that becomes a story, that becomes a video game, becomes and so there's all kinds of that stuff. But I don't think the future of literature is ever going to go away. I mean, I think one thing we've learned is 2,500 years of writing, and like 1,000, 1,500 years of the Codex block of the book. It's a tried and true technology, right? So it's not going anywhere. Literature still works. People still like to read. In fact, people read more now than they ever have. It's just that the kinds of reading they do is different, or it's shifting a little bit. But the future of literature is, I think, perfectly fine. The question is, in what new ways will literature compete with and play along with media? And I think you can see some of this emerging in like the Twine games and Twine stories. Like Michael Lutz has done a number of these things. If you get a chance, maybe you guys can check out. My uncle works for Nintendo. It's Michael Lutz is a former student of mine at Indiana University, and he does really cool stuff with Twine. But my uncle works for Nintendo, went viral a couple years back. Was featured in Wired magazine. It's a really fascinating little story. But I think it's something that you might look at as an example of like what might digital literature look like when it starts to take advantage of some of these affordances. But yeah, I don't think literature itself is going anywhere anytime soon. I mean, departments and things might downsize and the focus might shift a little bit, but people are never tire of books, right? Because you don't really have to worry about a book crashing or losing your data in a book, right? So it lives there forever. So my voice is going. I'm getting deeper and scratchier, as you can tell. So I'm going to stop there. I really appreciate you all taking the time to look at my work and to express your feelings and thinking about it. Some of you were spot on, and some of your responses in the blogs. Like Jess B is what I got here. He's saying that through our creation, we are adding to the digital culture, even through the smallest or most meaningless gesture of digital mediation. That's absolutely true. That's what my whole point is. Everything we do online creates more about the online culture and online space. And the more we produce in the digital space, the more it transforms, how we think about the digital world, but also how we think about our world, because they're not as separate as we want to make them. The digital isn't out there separate from us, from the real. It's around us. I mean, your body's literally being penetrated by Wi-Fi signals at this moment. So, and the cloud doesn't actually live in a cloud. It lives in a warehouse in North Carolina, right? So it's a server somewhere. So, we are reorienting to these things, but the more we produce and draw attention to our worlds and our lives and our creations, the more possibilities we have for creating and recreating and remaking things across the board. There's a couple others. You had some really good stuff. Somebody had a typo, which I loved. It was like Sam used that. I believe that Hodgman was trying to make a similar point. Remediation is about using a text and representing it in a new light for the purposes of deeper understanding or new perspective, right? Love this for a couple reasons. One, I think you're reading things, along the right lines in terms of what I'd hope people will take away. But the fact that, I believe that Hodgman was fascinating. I love it. So it's great. I've never been called that before. So either it was intentional, which is well done, or it was accidental, which is well done. So I'm gonna take it as a win. And then my other favorite line, which is actually, a lot of folks had something similar, which was is it Teresa? I think I said, the video was unexpected and left you thinking, what just happened after it was finished? Truth be told, that's the exact response I got at Computers and Writing. I presented this along with Dan Anderson. We did something together. Dan Anderson's at North Carolina. We did some really cool stuff. And when we got done, people weren't even sure how to ask questions. So he played his thing, which is a live performance on the computer. Like he plays a computer like it's a piano. It's brilliant. And then I did this video thing, and there were not questions about the work. What happened was people started to just have a conversation about things in the works. They didn't ask us questions. They started talking among themselves. And it was one of the weirdest and yet most valuable presentations I've ever given. So in that regard, it was absolutely spot on. There was a sense of like, what just happened? What did we just see? How do we see it? And what do we do with this? And I think that's really at the heart of a part of what I'm trying to accomplish, which is it's very easy to turn into the critic when you have a clear sensibility of an artifact that looks like it's supposed to look. But what do you do with things when there are, multiple threads operating at the same time, multiple complexities, some of which don't go anywhere, some of which go everywhere. And so it becomes a challenge. And for me, at the core of what I'm doing is hopefully, thinking about media and production as a relay to something else. And then I use that relay activity that, this makes me want to do this as an inventive tool in my work. And I borrow that again, a lot of this, my PhD, my dissertation was heavily invested in the work of Gregory Ulmer. And so a lot of this thinking, at least the conceptual work behind the practical stuff that I do, comes out of Greg's sort of theoretical perspectives. So those are my thoughts. I hope this has been valuable. If you keep going, you find other stuff of mine, let me know. I'll see if I can pop back into class. And if you have more questions or concerns, feel free to share them. But otherwise, I wish you all great luck in your semester and working on these projects and your blogs. And I hope that you find the class meaningful. And if nothing else, if you found the work confusing and distracting and bothersome, yeah, awesome. And don't make that, right? So, think about, what you want to do and how you want to do it, and let your own sort of production come out, right? And see what comes out of that mess. So, again, thank you for your time, and enjoy your afternoon.